What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Grizzly Bear Blues Live. I'm your host, Parker Fleming, recording this on Sunday because I'm a busy fella. Mavericks play on Monday night. I'm going to be going to the Mismatch at New Daisy Theater on Tuesday, and my recording days are on Wednesday. And recording during the day is a little tough for this big-time guest, so Sunday night it is. Hopefully none of this goes cold takes exposed or anything. But before I introduce our guests, let me tell you how you can keep in touch with the blog and with the podcast. So GBB Live is the flagship Memphis Grizzlies podcast for Bluff City Media, a part of the Grizzly Bear Blues podcast network feed. And you can find it anywhere you get your podcast: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Megaphone, and anywhere. You'll have GBB Live, Starting Five, Core Four, and Next Gen Grizzly Bear Bets. We got it all over at Grizzly Bear Blues and Bluff City Media, so check us out. Make sure you are following us on Twitter at SBN Grizzlies. Go read all of our work over at bluffcitymedia.co. Become an insider as well, but I'll get into some inside stuff towards the end of the show. Let me introduce my guests. Well, for one, I'm your host, Parker Fleming. With me is none other than the co-host of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. He is the Memphis Grizzlies columnist for Bluff City Media. He has too many wrestling monikers of Grizzlies Twitter to keep up with. You have The Undertaker of Grizzlies Twitter, the Ric Flair Grizzlies Twitter, the Big Show of Grizzlies Twitter, however you want to spin it. It's Joe Mullinax, a.k.a. Mullagrizz. Joe, what's up, man?
I think I'm more The Undertaker. If I have to pick one, I think I'm The Undertaker because I refuse to die. I think that just makes a lot of sense. And then also, on another note, the fact that I still kind of hang around, like the Dead Man show that he does, the One Dead Man show kind of thing. And, I just think that that's more fitting. Ric Flair had a lot more fun. Undertaker seems like a homebody, kind of like me. So it lines up in that way. But I'm happy to be back with Bluff City Media, obviously through GBB. Happy to be working for Parker. The shoe is on the other foot now. And Parker's a great boss. So is Mark King. And, they just kind of let me do what I want to do at this point, which is right. And, Parker handles all the organizational stuff, and I get to be a writer. So it's almost like an editor emeritus without all the responsibility. It's a pretty sweet gig.
Yeah. You get to write. You have people using your promo codes, and you're back on GBB, and, it's a blast having you back. I don't.
Is anybody really
really
surprised? Probably not, right? Like that
honestly, when this whole move came to be with the Bluff City Media, we were already going through a little bit of change, losing our hustle guy, assistant to the site manager, Brandon Abraham, and Joe Mullinax was not going to let GBB die out. So I respect it. Big time.
I literally have had one hobby the last 9 years of my life, and it's the Memphis Grizzlies. So, and Grizzly Bear Blues. So no, I was not going to let Vox, who I still get paychecks from. So shout out to Vox and SB Nation.
So do I. I did too.
Check out my article about the Sacramento Kings on Monday. So don't want to trash them too much because they still pay me.
Yeah.
But I obviously value what we did at Grizzly Bear Blues, and it's nice to see it as part of Bluff City Media, and everybody there has been pretty awesome. I think it's been as close to seamless as a transition as you could ask for. And, there's a bit of a disconnect at times with having to pay for like my articles and your articles. But, I would say our work is comparable to anybody's, and now, as I've said a couple of times, we're playing with the big boys, right? We used to say we're the best free option for coverage. Well, we're not completely free anymore. So we have to step up our game. I know that you've done that. And hopefully I'll continue to do that as a writer myself. And, we'll keep helping build Bluff City Media to keep GBB rolling.
Right. And, we're trying our best. I know it's a very touchy subject with a free content versus a paywall. But, just for like $5 a month, with Joe and I, Grizzly Bear Blues, and as well as like Chip Williams, Nate Chester, Sean Coleman, Bryson Wright, Luad and Seabury, a lot of those people have written insider pieces. We get something every weekday. So for 25 insider pieces a month at least, that's 20 cents per article. And that doesn't even include all the Tiger stuff that you get as well. We're trying to make it worth it over at Bluff City. Obviously, just, if you have any questions, always reach out to me. I never mind. But let's get into the show. People don't want to listen to a 30-minute podcast talk about Bluff City Media and all the great stuff there. Let's talk about the Memphis Grizzlies, who are finding their groove right now. They have won. I'm trying to piece it together in my head. Is it 5 of the past 6?
5 and 3 in the 8 games without Ja Morant is probably the best way to describe it. So they've won. Because they're 5 and 3 in those games. They obviously had the massive comeback against the Spurs. They had the drumming of the Golden State Warriors, which is always fun to say out loud when it's true. They've done a pretty good job, the Grizzlies have, of navigating this insanity. Because, obviously with all of the Ja Morant stuff, Steven Adams still being out in terms of on-court product is massively important. And then, of course, Brandon Clark's injury, which I know crushes your spirit. Losing him is extremely important as well, for a variety of different reasons. So they're 5 and 1 in their last 6, which is pretty remarkable. 2 of those wins being against Golden State, 2 coming against Dallas, a weakened Dallas Mavericks team. That won't be the case Monday. I believe Kyrie will be playing in that game. The one loss they had was in Miami against the Heat. And, they've shown some gumption, some grit in that comeback against the Spurs. And, they've shown some dominant levels of play from guys like Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. And that's all reason to be optimistic. If they can find a way to integrate Ja, which I know we'll talk about here in a moment, successfully, then, maybe this season isn't as lost as it felt 2 weeks ago.
Absolutely. And one of those names I do want to talk about, because I know we will get to, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. here later in the show, but got to talk about Luke Kennard, man, who became a little divisive on Grizzlies Twitter for some reason,
So dumb.
Here's the thing with Luke Kennard. The dude's a sniper. I mean, the dude might be a better shooter than Desmond Bane. If we're being, as far as accuracy and timing of his release, I mean,
key word being shooter, right? Nobody would say that he's a better player than Desmond Bane. Desmond Bane is very clearly a better player. In terms of the pure skill of shooting, I think there is a debate to be had there.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, but the utilization, you're trying to figure that out to an extent, because it felt like he wasn't shooting enough threes as a Memphis Grizzly thus far. I mean, I'm looking prior to that Miami game on Wednesday, he was only attempting 4 threes a game, shooting 45.5% from 3, and his defensive woes were outweighing his 3-point volume, which led people to be outraged. Whereas I wrote for Bluff City Media an insider piece on why the answer wasn't less Luke Kennard because of his defense. It's more Luke Kennard because of what he does at an elite level as a 3-point shooter and what he can do at a solid level as a playmaker. Somebody who's going to keep the ball moving in the offense. Somebody who can run an offense when Ja Morant, Tyus Jones are on the floor. And I felt like that Miami game, they put him in garbage time and he was able to quickly kind of show his shooting chops. I think he hit like 4 threes in the fourth quarter there. And I was following along with you on Twitter and you're like, oh yeah, this Luke guy, he can shoot. And
crazy.
But everybody wants to focus on what's going poorly, especially when this stretch of the season hasn't been great. And then played a big role in that. And like the big things for me is like, can he shoot more? And we'll get into that in a minute. Can he shoot more? And can he play them more? Because even in that, he wasn't averaging a whole lot of minutes, as many minutes as he should have been averaging for a Memphis Grizzlies team without Ja Morant. He was averaging in his 11 games with the Memphis Grizzlies prior to, actually, let's add that Miami Heat game into the mix here. He was averaging roughly like less than 21 minutes a game in 12 games. And in Friday night against San Antonio, he was a catalyst in that comeback victory along with Kenneth Lofton Jr. I got to give those flowers when necessary because people wanted to dunk on me on Twitter and stuff. So, but Luke Kennard hit 4 of his 7 3-point attempts in that Spurs game. He also had 3 assists and 4 steals. And then against the Golden State Warriors, last night, technically, he was 4 of 8 from 3, hit 4 threes in the first half. And he also had 5 assists there. And I think the big keys there, because a lot of the Kennard minutes had been shaky as he's getting integrated into the mix. Plus 21 against the Spurs, plus 4 against the Warriors. And, it looks like he's getting comfortable. And, Joe, I just want you to kind of speak on, I guess, this Luke Kennard experience and then I guess your side of things, because kind of like me, like when they made this deal for Luke Kennard, like people should have been more hyped about getting a 45% three-point shooter who can also create for his teammates for just Danny Green, who was coming off a brutal knee injury at 35 and 3 second-round picks. So where do you stand here?
Yeah. Well, I stand in a familiar place, getting yelled at on Twitter, which has been, roughly the last decade of my life. My struggle, Parker, is that Grizzlies fans, and in fairness, fans of most professional sports teams or even college sports teams, they want to have their cake and eat it too, right? Like when you acquire a player, you want them to be perfect or you want them to be elite. You want them to be able to do everything at a solid level or better. And I think that what's happened with Luke Kennard, at least among fans, I'm not at practice, I'm not privy to coaches' meetings and that sort of thing. At least among fans, I'm not trying to say that Luke Kennard's a good defender because he's not. He's average at best, probably worse than that. I'm trying to say, and I've said this multiple times, when you have someone that has an elite NBA skill, right? Like Luke Kennard has an elite NBA skill. He is an elite three-point shooter. That's not hyperbole. That's not Joe being Joe. He's just talking out of his, you know what. Look at the numbers, watch the games. He is an elite three-point shooter. John Conchar is not an elite three-point shooter, right? In fact, you could look at everybody that's on the Grizzlies bench right now, and none of them, except for maybe Tyus Jones, if you want to talk about assist to turnover ratio and things like that, none of them are really elite at anything, right? Except for one dude, Luke Kennard, who's elite at shooting three-pointers. Now, if you have half-court offense issues, if you have concerns with spacing for superstar point guards like Ja Morant, or even very good starting point guards like Tyus Jones, creating in the pick and roll, getting to the basket out for his floater, dribble penetration to kick out to open shooters, you need guys that opposing teams actually respect shooting the basketball. And we can't ignore that Dylan Brooks has had some success recently, getting it, regressing to the mean a little bit in terms of making some shots finally. But there is no regressing or progressing to the mean for Luke Kennard because his mean is elite. And there are two guys on this roster that are elite NBA three-point shooters, Desmond Bane and Luke Kennard. So if I were a coach, would be trying to find a way to get Luke Kennard on the floor as much as possible, whether it is playing him at the 1 with Desmond Bane at the 2. Again, I don't have illusions of grandeur, right? I think Luke is a smart basketball player. I think he's able to read opposing sets. I think you talked about his steals a moment ago. He's opportunistic in that way. I think that he finds himself in terms of positioning his body better than we gave him credit for. A rebound against the Warriors kind of stands out in my mind, or at least it could have been a clean offensive rebound for Golden State, I think, and he knocked it away. He does things better than I think we expected him to. And that doesn't mean that he's good defensively. Like I said, he's average at best, and that's probably being kind. But he's not so bad defensively that it negates, especially as a reserve, what he is capable of offensively when given the opportunity. And I think these last couple of games we've seen that, and hopefully Taylor Jenkins will continue to allow the elite skilled Luke Kennard to continue to display that elite skill as part of the Memphis Grizzlies rotation.
Right. And like you're pointing to elite three-point shooting, and he's leading the NBA in three-point percentage right now at 46%. He led it last year at 44.9%.
What are we talking about?
The season before that, he was 8th at 44.6%. I mean, the dude has consistently shot 45% from three for the past 3 seasons. And one thing too, it's not like he's like Troy Daniels or anything. Like Troy Daniels, he was undersized, couldn't defend, couldn't make reads.
Troy Daniels stunk.
He could only
Luke
shoot
Kennard
threes.
does not stink. Luke Kennard does not stink in that way. You mentioned, I brought this up, and I love Matt Hardlicka. Shout out to Matt Hardlicka. But he talked about why are we showing film from a guy 3 years ago about I didn't realize that being 26, you were washed in the National Basketball Association. This is a guy who, given the opportunity in Detroit, was able to, again, I'm not saying he's elite at it. He's not Tyus Jones. He sure as hell isn't Ja Morant. But you know what Luke Kennard is capable of? Getting around one pick, dribbling a few times, passing to a dude in the corner. He can do that. And because of his own shooting skill, guess what those guys have to do, Parker? I know you know this. They have to go over screens. Well, what happens when they go over that screen? Defenses have to help. What happens when there's help? That means there's an open shooter somewhere. It's crazy how it works. We make this harder than it needs to be, right? We make it harder than it needs to be. Find the open shooter, have a good enough handle to be able to pass to someone else. Luke Kennard can do that for 14 minutes a game. And I'm sure you'll have me on in the offseason to talk about my Tyus Jones take. 14 minutes a game. That guy can do that, him and Desmond Bane. Pass to that guy. Quick dribble penetration, and Bane's better at it than Kennard. We overthink this some. And you're not going to get somebody, unless it's a Mikal Bridges or a Kevin Durant, that is elite at everything or elite at a lot of things. The Grizzlies were able, to your point earlier, for a small, comparatively speaking, cost, get someone with an elite NBA skill. Just let him be elite, man. Just let him be elite. Yeah. If you want to play him with Jaren Jackson Jr. almost exclusively because of those offensive or defensive concerns, sure. There's ways to work that rotationally. Again, I'm not saying that Kennard is better defensively than he is. Again, he's average at best. But we have to be real with what this team is working with. You can't, on one hand, say the half-court offense has to be improved, and then on the other hand, say you can't play Luke Kennard because of defensive concerns. He's the one guy on your reserve group that can help with the half-court offense struggles of the starters once Adams and Morant are back.
Right. And it's also like one of those things, too. It's like he helps Morant, too, because like you said, people got to help off. They can't help off Kennard because all Ja has to do is kick it and it's an open three ball from a elite 3-point shooter. So it opens up driving lanes for Ja Morant, which is a big part of their late game struggles. When I was breaking it down, it was because teams weren't respecting Dylan Brooks in the middle of the worst shooting slump of his entire career. Correct. And then you also had a paint-oriented big who was not going to shoot the ball, whether it was Steven Adams, Brandon Clark, or Xavier Tillman. And then Desmond Bane, he's an amazing 3-point shooter. But a lot of the times on the floor, he was in a spot where it was an awkward passing radius for Ja to where the defenders were going to help just because, okay, we're going to make sure Ja can't make that pass to Desmond Bane. Right. So now at that point, it's okay, it's either a wild contested shot in the paint from Ja or Jaren Jackson Jr. from three. And that's or dump off into a big man. And that's it. But now they have a lot more optionality. And also, too, we talked about it earlier in the show. They don't have Brandon Clark, who was a reliable source of offense off the bench. I know he doesn't shoot threes or create his own shot or anything, but you can count on a consistent 8 to 12 points from Brandon Clark. Sometimes,
because you know what Brandon Clark is, Parker? Sorry to cut you off. You know what Brandon Clark is? He has an elite NBA skill. He's elite at finishing at the rim. Again, we're overthinking this, folks. You are overthinking it. I'm talking to you, and I'm looking at you. You're listening. You're overthinking this. Find people that have elite skills and let them play the game. Brandon Clark had an elite skill. Will he have that elite skill moving forward? Again, that's a subject for another podcast. He had.
Yeah, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me right now on my podcast.
I don't want to. It is your podcast. I'm sorry, Parker. I apologize.
It's all good. So
Luke Kennard, of everybody that's there, Luke Kennard on the reserves, right? Because again, the starters you can make Steven Adams, elite at rebounding. Jaren Jackson Jr., elite at multiple things. Desmond Bane, elite at multiple things. Ja Morant, Dylan Brooks, elite defender. Among the reserves, aside from Tyus and the assist to turnover bit, which he is elite at, what else you got? Nothing, right? You've got nothing. play the guy that should be your seventh man moving forward, assuming Tyus Jones plays better as a reserve than he has at any other point this season, which again, that's a topic for, maybe later in the episode here. He's your seventh man. He has to be, in my opinion. If you want to actually have half-court offense improvements, he has to be your seventh guy, and he has to play some minutes with Ja because it'll help maximize that space like we were talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And, I'm going to get into another Luke Kennard related topic, but first I do want to cut into some audio that Taylor Jenkins and Luke Kennard had to say about his offensive role and kind of that let it fly mentality. A lot of great stuff in there that I think y'all would like. So we're going to transition to that real quick, and then Joe and I are going to chop it up here. All right, Kenny, and this is where you're going to put in the Luke Kennard, Taylor Jenkins stuff and then edit this part out. Okay, cool. All right, yeah, so it's great to hear, Joe, that everyone is on Luke Kennard's case when it comes to shooting three-pointers, because that has been kind of the book on him since his Clippers run. Obviously, in that first Clippers season, he didn't play alongside Kawhi Leonard at all that season. And then also, too, and also I think they missed a lot of time from Paul George. So somebody had to shoot, and it was Luke Kennard. He shot 6 threes a game, shot 44.9% from three. And then with the Clippers this season, it fell to 3.8. He's at 4 total right now because it's 4.6 per game with the Grizzlies. And I kind of want to get it from your point of view. Like, where so far, I talked about it seemed like Luke Kennard wasn't getting enough threes. In my article, I said, can he get at least 6 a game? Because, getting 6 threes a game from a reserve, pretty good. Like, a lot of starters mainly get 6. Getting 6 from a reserve would be great. Where do you kind of divide up the pie in your eyes when it comes to I don't want to say the blame, because there's no one really, it's not like a blame chart, but who do you think's kind of been, I guess, a deterrent for Luke Kennard, kind of slowly getting his three-point attempts up, and how they haven't been as high as they would expect? Would it be Taylor Jenkins? His teammates not getting used to Kennard's spots, Kennard just passing up shots to fit in with the flow of the offense, or just give him some damn time because he just joined the team a month ago?
I think it's a combination of all those things, Parker. I think Taylor Jenkins plays, and I'm developing a reputation. John Conchar plays too much because, again, John Conchar is not elite at anything. John Conchar is really good at being malleable. On Locked On Grizzlies last week, I compared him in Hangover Part 2 to when the father in that movie talks about stew being rice, like that moist, sticky rice that, has no flavor, has nothing. But it's malleable. It can work with lots of different sauces and different ingredients. And that is kind of what John Conchar is, okay? He is malleable. He is not better than Luke Kennard. He shouldn't be playing. David Roddy, obviously, I'm a little more okay with taking minutes from Luke Kennard because Roddy's been playing really well, right? And I think it's fair to say that, David Roddy is more versatile than Luke Kennard. Roddy is taking the Dylan Brooks defensive assignment of the toughest guy on the perimeter when Dylan's not out there. I'm sure you've noticed that as well, Parker. So, if you do that with Luke Kennard, it's going to be a nightmare. I would not suggest that. So, again, if they wanted to play Roddy in front of Kennard, at least I might disagree with it, but at least I understand. I think Taylor Jenkins is not giving him enough opportunity. He has the last couple of games, and hopefully that continues. Kennard does need to shoot the ball more, as you mentioned, and he says it himself. Going back to those Clippers days, he holds the ball too much. There was one shot where he caught it and had a layup. It was almost like the Ben Simmons infamous, I'm right there to score it and I'm going to pass the basketball. Obviously, Kennard's not the athlete that Simmons is, but he was there at the rim and he decided that he wasn't going to shoot the layup for whatever reason. He's too generous. He needs to realize, he is an offensive weapon in his own unique way, and he needs to score. They need him to score some points. I think that, anytime there's an in-season trade for someone that has a specific elite skill, it takes time to integrate that. It would be different if Mikal Bridges was here right now because he's just a really freaking good all-around basketball player. You throw him on the floor and it probably works out. Whereas with Kennard, where are his spots? Where's his shooting pocket? Where does he like to receive the ball? How does he fit in terms of an offense that doesn't have a ton of set stuff for 3-point shooters because they don't have a ton of 3-point shooters.
Right.
So how do you make that link in the middle of a season? I think all of that adds up to Luke not getting the shots that he needs. But the good news is all of those things, if you make slight changes here or there, again, from Kennard to the coaching staff to the players themselves, I think that 6 per game is a realistic number. And again, he's shooting 45% from 3. That means he's making almost 3 threes a game in 20-some minutes of play. That's almost 10 points, double-digit scoring every night. That's pretty helpful for a reserve.
Extremely, extremely helpful. And that doesn't consider, like there's gonna be nights where, like against that Clippers game, he hit all 5 of his threes. And then Saturday night against Warriors, 4 of 8, hit 4 of them in the first half, 3 in the second quarter. Like that's like that's so huge to have off the bench. And I like that. That's kind of where I stand. Taylor Jenkins, he runs a lot of pick and roll. I think they were like, last time I checked, they were like 6th in pick and roll frequency in the league. And they really rely on getting downhill and either finishing in the floater zone, getting a dump off to a big man that's either rolling or in the dunker spot, or hitting the opposite side corner for an open 3. They're trying to get defenses to collapse and see what advantages are there. And so with that, there's not a lot of looks for shooters. They have got a little better about running some sets for shooters. I still wish that Desmond Bane would shoot more threes, but
yeah,
that's an entirely different topic.
Especially with Ja out, that's kind of understandable though, right?
It's tough. Yeah. And I would
he's
trade.
Being asked to beat Ja essentially right now in terms of his ability to get to the.
I would keep the 22, 25 points a game and 7 assists over the 10 3-pointers, if we're being completely honest, because that's showing growth in his game. But this is not. We'll get into Desmond Bane here in a minute. Luke Kennard, they're running more stuff for Luke, trying to run him off some screens, get him into different spots on the floor to get his shots. One thing I noticed that he does extremely well, and it's very subtle, but it's a big thing that Grizzlies enemy number 1 or 2 right now, Klay Thompson, it's something that he's perfected over the course of his career, and it's subtle relocating. They start in the corner, and as the drive is happening, you relocate to the wing to get into a better shooting pocket, better passing window for the driver. So when the defense is collapsing, their man's helping, and they're focused. His man is focused on the drive. He slides up into the wing, boom, right in the shooter pocket, 3 ball. And I think that's something Luke Kennard's excelled at. And again, it's just letting it fly. It's just letting it fly. And I mean, for this Grizzlies team, a team that struggles with half-court offense and 3-point shooting, if they're getting roughly, we'll say about 43% shooting on 12 to 13 attempts per game, just from Desmond Bane and Luke Kennard alone, not considering anything you're getting from Jaren, anything you're getting from David Roddy, Dylan Brooks, Santi Aldama, Tyus Jones. Tyus Jones, who's sneakily been a good volume shooter this year. That's going to help your offense so much. Your half-court offense, your 3-point shooting. So yeah, I'm excited about how all this is kind of transpiring thus far. And hopefully he does not have an 0 for 5 shooting night against Dallas as by the time this goes up. But Joe, do you have any final Luke Kennard thoughts before we move on to the next topic here?
Man, even if he was 0 for 5, he'd be shooting 43 or 44% instead of 48 or 49, right? Again, you have to go with the sample size of his skill set. He is an elite 3-point shooter. You need spacing, especially if you're trying a dribble kick offense. You need that guy out there. You need him on that wall. Put him out on the wall. Let him be that guy for you. Stop making excuses as to why it's not working, and let him be elite at what he's really, really good at. That's why you pay him. You don't pay him to be a plus defender. You pay him to have an elite impact offensively and be good enough defensively for that impact to be felt.
Absolutely. As me and my fellow Gen Zers say, just let him cook. Just let him cook. Yeah. So
as you can tell, I do
not
not say that often.
Yes, sir. So by the time this is up, Ja Morant will be back with the team. Taylor Jenkins did mention that there will be a ramp-up process for him, as Ja even said I think he said it in his interview with Jalen Rose, that he had not played basketball since going to Florida for, I don't want to call it's not rehab. I don't know what it is.
Counseling.
Yeah. For going. He didn't when at counseling, that's understandable. You're focusing on yourself. You're focusing on your mental being. You got to take that time for yourself. You got to let yourself heal. It's just like an injury. You got to let yourself heal before you get back on the floor. So hopefully, maybe by the time this goes up, he'll be playing on either tonight's air quotes for the people listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that. Or on Friday night against the Houston Rockets. I think Rockets games are a perfect ramp up, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But yeah, but there's like you've alluded to, a reintegration process for getting Ja Morant back into the flow of things. Obviously, I'm not entirely worried about like any sort of like locker room dynamics. They've all embraced Ja and they've been with him throughout this entire process. And I know Ja's in multiple statements has apologized to the team for his actions. I'm not worried about all of that. But I mean, there's always that reintegration process when getting a guy back, especially when your team is kind of, hitting a stride a little bit. As we said, they're 5-3 since Ja's been away from the team. They've won 5 of their past 6 games as of this recording. And even if they lose against Dallas, it'll be 5 of their past 7 games. So still, they're playing really well. They're getting a lot of great contributions. And this isn't saying like, oh, how is Ja going to mess things up or anything? Because at the end of the day, you're getting an all-NBA point guard back. Like you're getting an all-NBA point guard back into the mix that is averaging 28 points and 8 assists a game this season.
Seems good.
That's good. I would say that's good. So what's the biggest thing that you're going to be watching, Joe, as Ja Morant and the Grizzlies are kind of just getting back to the swing of things together?
I think that, and I talked about it a little bit earlier. For me, it's not so much Ja Morant, because Ja Morant, he's going to have some rust, but Ja Morant's going to come back and be Ja Morant, when he's on the floor, an all-NBA level guard. That's what he is at this stage, as a scorer, as a creator off the dribble, as an athlete. He's one of the top 15 or so players in the NBA, no question. Might take a couple of games to get back to that. But as you alluded to, Parker, if you had to pick a ramp-up opponent, it's the Houston Rockets. So I would imagine Ja will start Wednesday. I'm making a bold prediction. And again, like you said, maybe egg gets on my face. I would believe
or the pie
that Morant is going to, or pie. Yeah, that's true. I do have history recently with pies. I think that he's going to play Wednesday. I think he's not going to come off the bench. He's going to start, and he might only play 25 minutes in both those games. Like maybe he's on a minutes limit. I could see that happening, but they might not they might need him for only those 25 minutes because of how bad Houston is. And again, both games are at home, and the Grizzlies are much better at home than they are on the road. I am more concerned about Tyus Jones, and I've written about this for Bluff City Media. I've talked about it online, and people, good Joe, how can you say trade Tyus? He's done so much. Grow up. All right, grow up. Do simple math, right? You have heard, Parker, you have heard Zach Kleiman say explicitly Dillon Brooks was not shopped as part of trade line deals that would have included Kevin Durant, Mikal Bridges, right? That is what was said by Zach Kleiman, correct?
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. So unless he's a liar, which maybe he is, because sometimes, they don't tell you the exact truth.
I will say too.
Okay.
If you keep a guy on your team after the trade deadline, You're not going to tell the media that he was being
Sure.
shot to the trade deadline.
That's
so,
fair. Yeah, that's a fair point. So, well, let's just for the sake of being crazy here, let's take him at his word, right? Brandon Clark, maybe that's a tradable contract. Steven Adams, unlikely, and he was injured, I believe, at the time, so he probably wasn't going to be somebody that was fully engaged in trade conversations. And even if he was healthy, he's pretty significant, as we've talked about here, there, and everywhere. Who's left? Who's left money-wise? It's Tyus Jones. And Ja Morant, for all his flaws, is about to enter a max contract where he's making, as of this moment, even, let's say he still gets the super max, maybe it goes up. But if he doesn't get the super max, he's making $33,500,000 next season. Tyus Jones is making $14 million. You want to tie up 47 plus million in two dudes that can't play together? I would rather not do that. So Tyus has not been a good reserve this year. Again, I've written about it. He's just not the same player. He's a very good NBA starter when he starts. But the problem with saying you're the best backup point guard in the NBA is eventually you're not going to start, right? Like he's the best NBA insurance policy. If Ja Morant regresses, if Ja Morant falls back into bad habits and they kick him out for the rest of the season, Tyus Jones can fill that void pretty admirably. He's not Ja, but he's a good NBA starter. But Tyus Jones has not been a good NBA reserve this season. So for me, the reintegration of Ja Morant has more to do because I expect Ja to be Ja, and I expect him to maybe even be better because he's going to be pissed off, right? And again, you can say whether he should be pissed off or not. That's a different conversation.
More mentally cleared.
Sure. Well, I think he's going to be pissed off. Like I think he's going to go in there. All these people doubt him. The same reason he is as good as he is. Now there's doubters again, right? Like there are people that are doubting him, and he wants to prove them wrong. So I think that with Tyus, it's how do you maintain this level of contribution? Because if you don't, now you're looking at a reserve unit that is once again struggling, right? And obviously Taylor Jenkins never goes to a true, second lineup anyway. And hopefully he sticks as the playoffs get closer with that 9-man rotation. It would probably be at this point without Steven Adams, an end of regular season 9-man rotation is probably Santi Aldama, Tyus Jones, Luke Kennard, obviously, and then, maybe John Conchar, somebody along those lines. David Roddy. Yeah. I would prefer David Roddy. So maybe Conchar is the odd man out. That's what I would like. But I've watched enough Taylor Jenkins now that Conchar will be in that mix because he hates me. I think that for me, it's more about Tyus Jones. That's a long-winded answer, but I'm good at those. I worry about him being in a position to contribute how he is now in shorter amounts of time in a different role because we haven't seen it this season. In the past, we've seen it. But, as you've written about for years, Parker, you could argue, the best 2-man rotation second unit in the NBA the last couple of years has been Brandon Clark and Tyus Jones. Yep. Brandon Clark and Tyus Jones were the worst pairing among Tyus Jones in terms of plus minus on NBA.com/stats. They were the worst this season between Tyus and Brandon. So I think that there's something going on there with him as a reserve. And if it doesn't get fixed, that's going to hamper what the Grizzlies are capable of. But again, that's 12 to 14 minutes a game.
Yeah. So like my take on the whole Tyus Jones reserve thing. Well, we could be honest. We could be honest here. You can say that the offseason moves were justified, but at the end of the day, they did lose Kyle Anderson, DeAnthony Melton. They lost depth, and they were trying to integrate. And then Zaire Williams was out for 6 weeks, and his injury just derailed his entire season. So I would say
that's true.
He had momentum in that summer league and preseason. I liked what he was cooking in preseason and summer league. That injury, he was playing catch up, and it just got to his head, in my opinion. And then you also had David Roddy and Jake LaRavia getting rotation minutes, learning the ins and outs of the NBA with, guess who on the floor? Tyus Jones. And then you also have John Conchar, who I think, his on-offs are the best among reserves, but John Conchar kind of like sneakily, kind of like Tyus, he's been better as a starter than as a reserve. And then, because again, like you said earlier in the show, malleability. And then also, too, with Jaren Jackson Jr.'s injury, a lot of those Tyus Brandon lineups, Brandon was the lone big man next to David Roddy or Jake LaRavia or Santi Aldama, who's been great. He's been good this season, but I mean, Santi doesn't exactly apply as much pressure on the glass as a rebounder than even like Jaren Jackson Jr. So that's kind of
like,
like,
if you're concerned about Luke Kennard's defense, you need to be worried about Santi Aldama's defense too.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm just kind of saying that I think the Tyus Jones reserve thing is kind of exaggerated just by the depth. The bench has kind of changed all of a sudden. And I think there's a kind of a groove to be finding because you have Luke Kennard now coming off the bench. David Roddy provides a little bit more upside. But here's what I think should happen when you're reintegrating Ja Morant when it comes to Tyus Jones. And I'm actually going to steal something from a short-lived Substack called Welcome Written in the Dark. I think Taylor Jenkins needs to change the rotation to where I would have, and instead of in that first substitution, instead of Santi Aldama and Luke Kennard, which just recently changed, it was Santi and John Conchar, but he's typically gone with his first subs being the 4 and the 2 because they want Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. coming in later.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that. Why not have Ja Morant come out first? Let Tyus play with, and then so I would say go Tyus and Santi out first. Okay. Mm-hmm. Have Santi come in for Xavier Tillman and have Tyus come in for Ja. So now you have Tyus, Bane, Brooks, Santi, and Jaren on the floor together.
Mm-hmm.
And you're letting Tyus primarily play with starters because he's playing with Desmond Bane, Dylan Brooks, and Jaren Jackson Jr. I guess that's how you can get his rhythm going. And then shortly after, later in the quarter, you have Luke Kennard come in. Now you have Tyus and Luke. And then to start the second quarter, I know they typically put Jaren Jackson Jr. in the game. But now you can have the second quarter starting lineup, air quotes for my audio only people. Ja Morant, Luke Kennard, David Roddy, and then now this kind of get dicey. You have Xavier Tillman at center, and then just whatever the heck you want to do with the 4. Whatever you want to do with it. That's how I would explore kind of tackling that Tyus starter versus Tyus reserve kind of deal, which I feel like you agree with me because you're the one that wrote it.
Yeah, back in the Written in the Dark days, loved that Substack. It was very popular. I think that there's ways to try to work around it, but again, if I, as an armchair GM, am building a roster, if I am going to have $48 million tied up in 2 players, I want them to be able to play together. That's a sizable chunk of your cap. And Tyus and Ja can't really play together. You know, your eyes tell you that. The numbers also agree with that. They back it up. So since they can't, you're essentially paying Tyus to be an insurance policy. To your point, though, in the here and now, that doesn't necessarily matter. That's more of an off-season question. How do you get Tyus in that place? The best way to do it is to change the rotation. And Ja has been out long enough that I don't know that it's that disruptive. I think that it's fairly possible if they're willing to do it, and if Ja is willing to do it. Obviously, he needs to be on board with it. But I think that it would help a lot because it would enable Tyus to get more run in that more traditional starting sense. And it would also give Ja a chance to play with Kennard more. You know, whether it's Roddy or whether it's Brooks, obviously they need somebody at the 3 to help them defensively. But as far as, Ja and Luke, I see a lot of potential there, similar to Ja and Bane. Not the same level because Bane's a little bit better creator than Kennard is, but Kennard still has that skill set. And I see Ja benefiting from having more minutes with a guy like Kennard who has similar elite skill to Bane, that will be valuable. And again, Tyus next to Desmond, we've seen it for the last 8 games. It's pretty successful.
Absolutely. And one thing I do want to get into before we close the show here, and I guess my portion of the reintegration of Ja Morant process is continuing to empower Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane. One thing I wrote about earlier this month when dissecting their late game offense was that there wasn't enough Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. It was call 12. And granted, it works. We've seen a lot of special moments happen in this inception of Grizz Next Gen from simply calling 12. And he's a potent driver. He's one of the most frequent drivers and pick-and-roll players in the league. He does really well getting to that floater, just manipulating his body in the middle of the air and just really just having the defense in the palm of his hands. I get it. But at the same time, off the counter, teams are just collapsing. I said this earlier in the show. Teams are just collapsing on Ja on the drive. And here lately, you've seen this really cool version of Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. unlock. Over the past 8 games, Desmond Bane is averaging 5.5 assists, and he's had 5 or let's say 6 or more assists in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those 8 games. He's had 6 or more assists. That's good for a shooting guard. Let's get into Jaren Jackson Jr. real quick. And in these 8 games, 22 points per game while shooting 50% from the field, 7 rebounds a game, 3 stocks. And he's also had 25 or more in the past 3 games. And he's had over 20 shot attempts in both the Spurs and the Warriors game. So my thing is how, like, I want them to kind of balance that however it works. Because, I mean, obviously, Ja's elite. Ja, let's be real. Ja is we'll say, depending on your bias or whatever, he's like a top 12 player in the league, which is still in the top less than 1% in the league. Ja's in that. Now, how do you continue to unlock this version of Jaren Jackson Jr., unlock this version of Desmond Bane? Because also, too, at the end of the day, it's only going to help Ja. A more featured Jaren Jackson Jr. utilizes Ja Morant's playmaking a lot more. And he can manipulate defenses with his drive, get defenses to collapse. There goes Jaren Jackson Jr. And it's a 3, or a slow big man tries to come and close out. Jaren's getting downhill to the rim. It's a layup. And then with Desmond Bane, he's become unlocked as a playmaker. What does that do? That gets off-ball Ja going, where he can start being utilized as a cutter. Desmond Bane can be driving on the left side, and here comes Ja Morant crashing from the right wing, dish, and maybe somebody gets dunked on. Who knows? I'm just saying, I don't want to minimize Ja at the expense of Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane. I'm not advocating that at all. I'm actually saying empower Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane to keep doing what they're doing, because they're going to make the game so much easier and even better for Ja Morant. It's going to make him even more unpredictable, in my opinion. And I think that's just what's going to help unlock an even better version of a Grizzlies offense going into the postseason.
Well, and to your point, Parker, Ja Morant, the Taylor Rooks interview, a lot has been made of that. And, when you're the anchor, you can't tell that you're drowning, kind of paraphrasing there. I know that's not the exact quote. I think that we apply that to his off the court issues. You could argue on a much less important scale, at least in terms of his mental health, it's applicable on the court too, for the exact reason that you said. Call 12 is fun, and it certainly has ended pretty well at times. But that has to feel pretty damning, pretty overwhelming in terms of, I have to be this guy. Now, if he, fully trusts Jaren Jackson Jr., and again, a game against the Lakers stands out in my mind where he dished it out to Jaren and he hit a 3 to win in LA in the last couple of years. He's done that from time to time, but as the years have gone on, he has certainly been more, okay, I'm just going to go Superman this thing, and he gets to the basket, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. He doesn't have to do it alone. He doesn't have to go down this road alone. And I think Bane and Jaren have shown, even though Ja is that top, 1% player in the NBA, Jaren and Bane are, top 2 to 3% at this point. Like I think you'd be really hard pressed to find a top 40 list that doesn't have all three of those dudes on it. Ja might be in the top 10 to 12, like you said, but are you really taking 30 other players before Jaren Jackson Jr.? Are you really taking 40 other players before Desmond Bane? I'm not sure you are anymore. So he has the help. The core is there. And hopefully through this process, he's watched them play and he's seen that they're capable of doing these things. He needs to not necessarily let go a little bit, but he needs to rediscover that trust that there's other guys that can help him carry this burden. While he is the guy, that doesn't mean there aren't others by your side to lighten the load some.
Right. Yeah. And then to your point on it's hard to not build a top 40 list without those three guys. The ringer.com has all three of those guys in their top 40. Desmond Bane's right at 40. But yeah, and it's just one of those things too. I guess the thing that's more tantalizing for me is just what Jaren Jackson Jr. is becoming right now, because you tweeted this on multiple. What's up?
Yeah, he's Giannis light.
And the thing, it's one of those things where it's like him realizing these mismatches, the fact that, hey, I'm either going to have somebody too small or too slow on me. Your teammates also saying, abuse these mismatch. Go get a bucket. I want to tap into that. I really want to see what a fully unlocked Jaren Jackson Jr. looks like, because if Jaren Jackson Jr. can become Ja's 1B, if we're being totally honest. Right now, I would say it's a 2A, 2B with Desmond Bane. And if Jaren Jackson Jr. becomes your Ja Morant's 1A, their championship odds increase, in my opinion.
But one of the flaws to that, and you and I have talked about this, and this is kind of the unspoken, but it has been spoken on, Ja and Jin have yet to develop that chemistry, especially offensively, for a team that is so pick and roll heavy, as you've talked about. A lot of times it's not Ja and Jared initiating those sets. It's Ja and Steven Adams. The argument for Xavier Tillman has been he's the most comparable screener to Steven Adams. It's not Ja and Jaren until, maybe a crunch time situation. And because of injuries and all sorts of other contexts, they haven't fully had an off season, a summer, for whatever, to fully realize each other in that way. And I think that, the reintegration of Morant is trying to find as good an in-season answer to that as you can, because you're right. I mean, Jaren has leveled up, and to lose that, especially with Brandon Clark out, especially with Steven Adams, assuming he comes back this season, he's obviously going to be rusty after missing so much time going into the playoffs. You need this version of Jaren Jackson Jr. alongside Ja Morant. There can't be a regression.
Absolutely. And Joe, this is about all the time we have. Just any final remarks before we close the show?
Well, I think that the big thing for this Grizzlies team is kind of rediscover that joy, right? Like, I watch the Sacramento Kings because I have League Pass, so I watch the Sacramento Kings play every once in a while, and they are the ones of the immaculate vibes now. Nobody's saying the Memphis Grizzlies have immaculate vibes, right? That's no longer the case. Whereas, in Sacramento, it's like looking into a mirror from the last year or two in terms of how much they're having fun and enjoying being together, and before expectations, that really fun time that you hear people talk about where, the team's just getting good, right? That's what the Grizzlies have been recently. That's what the Kings are now. I just want them to kind of rediscover that. In the last couple of games they have, that there's been some energy, there's been some joy on the side and on the court. With Ja coming back, hopefully feeling a little bit lighter from his own personal burdens that he's been dealing with, I want to see that over the next few weeks. Because again, without Mikal Bridges, without Kevin Durant, insert whatever wing, OG Anunoby, whoever, are the Grizzlies capable of making the NBA Finals? Yeah. Is it likely? No, it's not. So you want them to get back to who they were. And I'm not even necessarily mainly because, again, Brandon Clark's not going to be playing, right? So that's not realistic in that personnel sense. But in terms of their culture, who they are organizationally, you can't have that without a healthy Ja Morant. So above, and I mean mentally healthy Ja Morant. So above all the X's and O's and scheme and all that stuff, part of the joy of this era of Grizzlies basketball has been them just, being young and loving playing together. And I hope that they find that between this recording and the next time I'm talking with you, because, without that, you're a miserable team that's underachieving. You're the Atlanta Hawks firing a coach mid-season. You're the, you're the Chicago Bulls trying to figure out what the hell happened. You want to try to rediscover that spark. So I'm envious of the Sacramento Kings right now, and I hope the Grizzlies can get their groove back in that particular way.
Yeah, I see it happening, Obviously, I think you may not get the post-game gritties or it's a parade inside my city or
sure,
kind of the more audacity we've seen. But I think that's also part of their maturation process at the same time. This is their kind of their wake-up calls, like, oh, we need to grow up. We need to lock in. So, I would trade being locked in, as long as there's still good basketball, which that Warriors game was incredibly fun to see. It's always fun to kind of make a fool of Klay Thompson. But
yes.
Yeah. So, Joe, I appreciate you coming on the show with me. Anything else you want to plug in before I kind of get rolling with these plugs?
BluffCityMedia.co/join. I have a feeling you're going to talk about that. Come join us. Be a part of some local media. One of the knocks of GBB when I was running it was, being a nationally driven, arm, and me not being there in the city. Now our site manager, our Grizzlies editor, Parker Fleming, is in the city. It is a local business that we're a part of at GBB. So, support a local business and help us continue, like Parker has said, the Grizzlies, the Tigers, 901 FC Soccer. Literally, I think we're even covering the Memphis Showboats of the USFL. Like, there's so much that Bluff City Media is doing. In addition to our Grizzlies content, it's worth not getting Starbucks once a month, in my opinion. So that would be my plug, is go join Bluff City Media. It's worth it.
I was gonna make the Starbucks joke too. We're on the same wavelength.
Sorry, Parker.
It's not even a joke though.
One less double down from KFC.
But yeah, what Joe said, bluffcitymedia.co/join. For just $5 a month, you get all this premium insider content. Other Grizzlies, like, we're writing insider pieces at least one a day, every weekday, Monday through Friday. That's not even accounting for all the stuff you're getting from people like Christian Fowler for Tiger basketball, Tiger football. We're even covering like the smaller Tiger sports like baseball, softball, women's basketball, who had a really good season this season. We're 901 FC, Memphis Showboats, the Memphis Americans Indoor Soccer League. Like, we want to cover everything in Memphis. Like, this is a local media outlet, so trying to cover every element of sports inside this city. And, mean a lot if you subscribe. You can also subscribing gets you into this pretty cool Discord to get to talk about the game with all these Bluff City Media people and other fans trying to just join in the party. There's also some inside information disclosed in there, mainly and especially too, even though the Tigers are out, it's portal season. So
portal season, baby.
Why not get a little dose of what could be going on in the portal before anything's announced for just $5 a month? It's pretty cool, pretty good deal in my opinion. But yeah, if you don't already do so, follow us on Twitter at PakaFlocka, at Joe Mullinax. Follow the blog on Twitter at SBN Grizzlies. Read all of our work over at bluffcitymedia.co. And make sure you are subscribing to the Memphis Grizzlies or Grizzly Bear Blues, podcast network. and to the Bluff City Media YouTube channel as well. We got a lot of stuff we're trying to cook. Thanks to people like Kenny Stubblefield, Xavier Dotson, and to quote Dylan Brooks, kudos to myself. So yeah. But that's about all the time we have. So we'll see you next week. We'll see you. Make sure you subscribe. Bluff City Media. It's lit.